Okay, let's walk through the process I use for building an app. And in this case, we're going to do something I haven't ever done it quite this way before. So this is going to be a little bit different and should be really interesting. So, first off, we're using Chat GPT 01 Pro mode here, which maybe it's a little bit new. It just kind of dropped. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this actually works. I've used other Chat GPT models many times, and I've used the 01 beta, but I haven't used Pro yet. So, I do have a pretty solid process for how I go about building out an app. First, I'm starting with some specifications, just kind of defining, saying, hey, these are some things I want the app to do. I need you to kind of help me to define how we're going to go about implementing that and building the specification. What questions do you have for me? And then, so this thing came up with a bunch of questions. Now I'm just going through and just editing these questions. So far, all I'm using here is an Ubuntu 2404 box. It's running a web browser. It's got a Notepad app open and a terminal. And so, very, very simple, stripped down. I'm answering the questions about like how we're going to do the different things and kind of getting the specification drilled down. Now, this takes just a moment and this took a little bit of thought. So this particular app is building a app that mails letters to politicians, allows for the politicians for tracking different bills that are associated with given politicians, and then it should allow the user to actually like send the letter through like a automated letter mailing service and also pay for the usage of that service and make sure that the app it stands to break even or be profitable. So it's got e-commerce. It has a digital good that's being created by we're saying let's use a localized AI or something like that to automatically draft a letter, and let's have the AI on. Let's let the user automatically use AI to draft a letter, then mail the letter. Pay for the mailing of the letter, and and all of that. So as we go, I'm trying to make sure that the Chat GPT is happy with how we're going to do things, how the payments are going to work, what services we're going to use for that, how we're going to integrate with that, what happens under different conditions that might occur, and and we haven't written any code yet. All right, so we're still we're still in kind of a planning phase and sort of just discussing, asking some questions, and getting a framework kind of figured out here. All right, now I'm going to start writing code. I'm using fastapi for this project, so I'm asking Chat GPT, hey, go ahead and get this thing ready for me to, let's use fastapi, Python, let's get it, let's write this based on what we've determined here. And so I'm in a terminal, I'm in a little, command terminal shell, and I'm just sitting in Linux. This could be Windows or an Apple or whatever. And I'm just kind of discussing, planning the next phase. I actually am testing Pro here to see if it can generate an image, which it cannot. So I'm like, okay, that's not a problem. Let's just go ahead and move on. So I'm creating an Anaconda environment. This is just my normalized process for this. So I make an Anaconda environment, and then I'm going to create some files. I haven't, done a fast API app before, and I also haven't used Pro before. So I'm doing some things I've never done. Now I have built apps with Python-based apps, web apps using other frameworks with Chat GPT and other models, but this is my first attempt, a dry run at doing this with Pro and Fast. Okay, so created a few things. I have to do some things to make like a Postgres container. So I got to get my backend database ready. And basically, I'm like, all right, let's start up a container service for Postgres now. And then once we have that, then we're going to be able to allow that to connect to the settings that we build in our app, so that the web app can talk to the database with, preferably with our ORM. And so we're just starting up the thing here, configuring it, saying, all right, we started up an app container, or a container for a database, and now we have the database. Very, very simple, standard process. It's basically one command to deploy a container for Postgres. Nothing really new there. And I'm having some discussions with this thing and getting further and progressing with the code. So I'm really not gonna write any code here. I'm just gonna like ask it, hey, how would I do this? How would I do that? And then it's telling me, and I'm just copying and pasting all the things that it's giving me straight from Chat GPT into either the terminal or into some file I'm creating in some directory. And occasionally maybe there's an error, and so I have to go through and just ask Chat GPT, hey, what do I do about this error? And maybe I have the error a couple times, and maybe I explain it like, hey, here's the tree of my directories. Here's how my directory structure looks. What do you see here? And I'm still getting this error. And we go back and forth a little bit, and ultimately, after some troubleshooting here, this is just standard process. Okay, this is how we go. We just go back and forth and back and forth. Okay, we got an error. Here's the error. What do you got? Let's see. We go. Okay, we progress and see. Did we make progress? And so now, our app kind of has come up. We're running the app locally, and now we can start to kind of do some stuff. So we're going to define a few things. There's some database model information, some routes, some schemas. There's a few things that we have to define as this thing is going to provide us. So we're going to ask it for kind of, initial sort of hello world functionality, so that we can test and see, does this app exist? Is it starting? Can we see it? And kind of go from there. So every step of the way, I'm letting ChatGPT guide me. It's telling me maybe, to create some files. It's, I'm copying and pasting exactly what it's telling me, step by step, one step at a time. I'm not trying to throw too much at it. I'm trying to be very, very particular as to, okay, I've done this step. Let's move to the next step. Okay, I did that step. Let's move to the next step. I'm not even really telling it what I think the next step should be in many cases. And I'm just kind of letting it build this thing out. So it's like, all right, here's the concept of like a router for bills, so that you can pull different bills and see them. And here's, some different concepts. So this thing is conceptually moving along and building out my my project for me, and occasionally I'm having to check a couple of things, make sure that stuff is is where it needs to be. Maybe I'm looking at some tables. I'm looking at this is just testing some API endpoints here, running some curl commands, hitting some different APIs. And sort of like saying, all right, do we have an API endpoint that is capable of showing us something, right? So it's basically like, here, I'm going to make a concept of something that's like a bill, and the bill, a legal bill that a politician, is introduced, and now I want to be able to like put some, record in my database about this bill, and then I want to be able to read information about that bill from my database. So very, very, very simple, very straightforward stuff, kind of fundamentals of any kind of app that we're making. We start out with, we model the database fields using the models. This is standard in most web frameworks. And then, we define a schema for the API to use. We define a route for the API to use. And those three things work together and generate us the API. So now we're making some API calls. We're opening the browser. We're hitting some endpoints. We're loading some information, and we can see some things. So that's good. We're able to post some things in using curl. We're able to read some stuff using basically Git. Very, very primitive. Very, very simple. We haven't even pulled out really any big tools yet, but so far we are using, we're doing a lot of copying and pasting back and forth from Chat GPT here, and we're also, we're moving into now writing kind of we're thinking about the some of the LLM stuff and building out a few of the other little components. So one step at a time, slowly but surely. I'm defining. Okay, here's some endpoints. Here's some tests that I can run, some curls that I can run to hit some endpoints, to do some communication and testing, and sort of start to see, uh, what am I going to expect to get back? Hitting the LLM, now I'm running local llama. So I actually on this computer just installed llama, and it's running locally, and it's Olama is what I'm running. And so Olama is talking to I had downloaded like a local llama model, and so I know that I'm running this thing locally and that I can send an API call to it, and that API call will use my GPU and use the llama model, load it up, and then proceed to try to write a letter. And so now I'm saying, hey, let's have this thing on the back end, try to write a letter. And so I'm doing a little bit of prompt engineering here, and tied in. I think some LangChain is tied into this, and the Olama system, and so there's several different components coming together there. And I'm trying to get this thing to automate writing a letter and kind of making that draft of the letter. So I've already been able to successfully use Olama to send like a curl to Olama and say, hey, here's some text I want you to write. So I know the functionality is working there, and I'm going to go back and forth with Chat GPT with my code using my little environment here, and kind of figure out, all right, how do I get this thing working where it's going to provide me with the output I'm looking for. Now, I run into some errors, and ChatGPT, of course, has to do some resolutions on those, and this goes back and forth, right? So this is, again, standard process. It's not really something that I consider to be very frustrating. Some people might think of it as something that's possibly very frustrating, but I don't really think of it that way. But yeah, I go back and forth until I get it to respond. And so when I do get the response that I'm looking for, then I'm able to, I'll be able to move on to the next step, and get through this. But meantime, there's a lot of, you do an update. ChatGPT gives you some code. It doesn't quite work. You try it again. You go back and forth. And ultimately, it does tend to get the right answer if you go back and forth enough. So here we're doing some testing with Postman, hitting that endpoint and getting some errors dropping when we run it, but at least we are getting text. So, I'm hitting my local machine. I'm using a local LLM. I've got like a GPU on this server, on this particular computer, and I'm able to make the request. I'm able to get the response back, and it contains the LLM derived response in the text that I'm looking for. So that's that's the key thing that I needed here, and at least like from a standpoint of like a major functionality that this system now has the capability to do. I'm looking pretty good there. So I'm moving along, and kind of moving into okay, let's get these endpoints all dressed in, looking nice. Let's get this thing to the point where we have a project running fastapi. We can make a request to it. It can use my local LLM to generate some text, and then return that generated text in the API response that I make. And that's I would call that a pretty major step one in the process of this development.